Hello, Sean Innings here. Welcome to another edition of the Microcap Club Member Spotlight. In these interviews, we showcase many of the talented members of Microcap Club. And today we have Stefan Winter, a private investor. Stefan, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Happy to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing today.
So originally, I'm from Austria, born and raised there. Actually quite close to where Arnold Schwarzenegger is from. Yeah, so I spent most of my time in the mountains, going skiing or hiking in the summer months and just being out there in nature. But recently I actually moved to Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I really like it here so far. But of course, it's a complete opposite. Instead of mountains, we have bike lanes here. My professional background is actually in data science. So crunching numbers, building machine learning models, and also AI. So how they're built, developed, and trained. Which is certainly super interesting to me, at least. And I guess it's also kind of reflected in my investing style. My background in data science, since I usually let numbers tell the story. But of course, it's always still important to read annual reports, maybe talk to management just to get a full picture of a business. But in my opinion, numbers usually don't lie. So so far I couldn't really find a good way of how I can actually apply my knowledge in data science into investing. I'm always looking for ideas, but then of course need to validate them, test them if they actually work. So for example, for my master's thesis, I looked at what people were writing on Wall Street bets. And it was during the GameStop and meme stock mania. And I tried to measure what people were writing on Wall Street bets and use that as an input to predict the stock price of GameStop. And actually it was quite interesting because back then there was no research so far of how to measure what people were writing on GameStop because they have their own terminology, their own slang. It was actually quite difficult to measure. And then there was also no research of how to use that to predict the stock price of GameStop. So the thesis was in that regard actually quite novel and also interesting to do. But an interesting learning for that, so while the text, what people wrote on Reddit was actually a very valuable predictor of the stock price, it turned out that the price itself was actually the best predictor to predict future returns of GameStop. And I think that also tells a story about the markets, how competitive it is out there, and also how quickly information is priced in. But to go all the way back, I actually started investing a bit more than 10 years ago. So the moment I turned 18, I opened my first brokerage account, and I bought a highly diversified portfolio of free stocks. I still remember it was one bank, one company in the offshore oil and gas industry, and one industrial company. And pretty quickly I had to realize, I don't really know much about investing. So over the course of 1 or 2 years, I read hundreds of books about investing, accounting shenanigans. But of course, I also studied the investing greats. So Walter Schloss and Warren Buffett, read all of his letters and his partnership letters. And of course, I also read quite a few blogs. And I got inspired and actually started my own blog where I was mostly writing about nets. And I didn't really have a big audience, but I remember one day I woke up and I saw that an Australian hedge fund is actually reading my stuff. And to me, it was just so bizarre because, back then I was still living with my parents and I have this Australian hedge fund maybe making investment decisions based on what I write. So it was quite interesting to me.
Cool. And so how would you say you've evolved as an investor since then?
So of course, got a lot more experience. And there was a period in between where I actually had to sell all my stocks, where I started my own small business. So I had a bit of an investment break in between. But of course, as an investor, you need to constantly evolve and grow. And I think nowadays it's much easier for me to know what not to touch and what to stay away from.
And in terms of microcaps, was there a specific time or company or just period of your investing evolution where you started to get into that area?
I always thought, even since the beginning, how I can get an edge. And in my opinion, there are 3 ways how an investor can have an edge, either an information edge, analytical edge, or a behavioral edge. And to me, it was always pretty clear that there would be no way I could compete with hundreds of Wall Street analysts who all look at the same big stocks. And that's also how I started looking at smaller and smaller companies. And yeah, I realized, if I go really small, I also like looking at smaller, obscure exchanges, and that there's just way less competition out there. And it's also way easier for me to get an advantage compared to other investors.
What about, isn't there anything like in Austria? You'd have a little edge over there, right?
Yeah, like actually, there are quite a few interesting names in Austria. It's also a quite cheap market right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember there's like a liquor company that I also used to drink back in the days that traded super cheap for a long time. I never bought it. And then someday it just popped and was like a big spike. It's also something very typical for microcaps.
And so what would you say is your investing strategy today?
I don't really put myself in a certain bucket. Like I wouldn't never like classify myself as a pure value investor or growth investor or whatever. I treat every stock as a business and value them on a case-by-case basis. So if a company has like a higher growth profile, then of course it's also reflected in my evaluation. And the same is like if I look at a company trading far below book, then of course I need to be conservative enough in my liquidation assumptions, for example. I wouldn't say that I necessarily have one particular style. I just think that I really sit down, value every business on an individual basis. And if something is cheap enough, then it makes a good investment, in my opinion.
Yep. And what would you say would be your strengths and weaknesses within, your investing strategy?
So I guess one of my strengths is, since I also have been in the markets for quite some time already, I typically stay away from unprofitable companies. I just find it way easier to look at companies that are already profitable, preferably also growing. And staying away from hyped and trendy growing companies that just promise a big total addressable market. Because very often those assumptions are wrong. And even if the market can be very big, then of course the company still needs to execute and deliver on what they promise.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there any other investing, not themes in terms of like what to invest in, but are there any big ideas within the investing world that you have been thinking about lately?
I mean, right now, for me personally, there's like so much opportunity in small and microcap value. And especially if you look outside the US, like if you look in Europe, in Poland, Sweden, or now I recently started looking at the UK. To me, it's just incredible, like how cheap certain markets have gotten, especially in the very small and microcap space. And you can actually pick up a lot of really high quality businesses for a very cheap price. So yeah, right now I think it's a good hunting ground.
Yeah, and I've seen there's been a lot of write-ups on the MicroCap Club recently within European countries, UK, just that there's a lot of opportunities in non-North American companies.
Exactly. Like I remember during COVID times, there were also like a lot of write-ups coming into MicroCap Club, but also during COVID, like the good investing time window was over quite quickly. And it seems now that we'll see if it's going to take a longer time. But the new additions to MicroCap Club, like they've been of really high quality, I think, and also like a lot of really good write-ups coming in.
Do you remember when you became a member of MicroCap Club? I can't remember.
Yeah, I remember like I think it was in 2020 actually. Yeah, I think December 2020. So also during the COVID times.
And what could you say, Stefan, that has been one of the value adds that MicroCap Club has brought to you?
Yeah, I really think like they're really high quality write-ups on MicroCap Club, but also the discussions on there are uncomparable. Like there's always if other members try to question a thesis, there's always like a very civilized discussion going on. And of course, like another big benefit of being a member of MicroCap Club is networking with other fellow investors. Like another colleague from MicroCap Club is organizing another meetup in Belgium this year. So I'm very much looking forward to that. I went to last year as well, and I yeah, can recommend everybody to come.
Hopefully one of these times I'll be able to come out to the European one. But yeah, that's one of the things that Ian and I are trying to bring is more meetups and any other way for the members to further deepen their relationships, because I think that's one of the key aspects, especially trading in this space, because
I think it can get lonely. Like you sit at home, you read annual reports, study an industry, and it's always nice to connect with fellow investors. If somebody's close by, maybe you share some common investments. It's always nice to meet for a coffee and discuss ideas.
All right, Stefan, thanks again for joining us today. Are there any other places online that people can contact you or find some of your writings? Because you've mentioned you had a blog. I don't know if you still write on that, or if you have social media.
Yeah, I don't really post any blog posts anymore. People can, of course, find me on Microcap Club. But I'm also on Twitter at Stefan Winter 2, TOO. And yeah, if anybody wants to meet up for a coffee or a beer, feel free.
Awesome. Thank you again, Stefan, and look forward to chatting with you more in the future.